Welcome to the Patriarchy Podcast, where Christian husbands become respected leaders. And today we are talking about a topic of the utmost importance for any patriarch: how best to educate your children, especially your sons. And AJ Barker is here to tell us about the Crown of Thorns Academy, which is a new startup in education that he is founding. AJ, great to have you with us.
Will, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on as always, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, me too. So let's get right in with a fundamental question. How should an understanding of the nature of knowledge and learning inform our approach to education today?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's it's a great question because right, we're not just saying does our understanding of knowledge affect education, but actually we're assuming it does. What we're saying now, how does it? And that's where we have to start. So you said it in the opening, but I'm launching along with a co-founder of mine. We're launching what we hope to eventually be a network of schools of all boys elementary schools. They're going to start grades 1 through 8. So we're trying to say, hey, how you educate a, a boy matters from the time they're young. And studies show this, that the differences emerge literally from the time they're 5 years old. By the time a boy is 5 years old, what's called the parietal temporal lobe in the brain, I think is what it is technically. But it's a year and a half behind the processing speed of a 5-year-old girl. And this part of the brain actually has most to do with things like information processing. So it's not like an arbitrary random portion of the brain. It would bear directly on like reading ability. And so what these studies find is that trying to teach a 5-year-old boy how to read would be the same thing as trying to teach a 3-year-old girl how to read. It's not that they're not smart enough; it's just that their brain development's not there. And something we'll try and refer back to throughout this conversation, this sort of reality that um, our brains get disposed to do different things at different times in our development. And when you miss or try and hit those things prematurely, it doesn't work well. And if you have the patience and hit them when it is right, it works. It works really well and it works seamlessly, almost effortlessly. So it's not like you get to it earlier and you're preparing yourself for what happens later. It's not how it works. It's that basically nothing tracks, nothing records, nothing's retained. And then you get to the time where it is, and now it can. And so, what's more likely the case is that if they do it prematurely, by the time it's getting to the place where it is ready to retain it, they're more likely now to be doing things that actually the brain needs more fundamental things right then and there. And they're moving on to these applications. And so, it actually just kind of ends up leaving it more scrambled for a kid. So, okay, I say all that because it kind of circles back again, your question: how should our understanding of knowledge inform what we do in education? Right? We have one question for boys, which I started to lay out there, but then we have the broader question, which applies to all of us. How should knowledge affect, or the way knowledge works, affect it? And so we refer often to the angelic doctor, Thomas Aquinas, and Thomas gives some profound answers to this question in very specific places. Um, and they're typically involved in how does one person teach another. So in the third part of the Summa, Thomas Aquinas will ask, was any man a teacher of Christ? And he's ultimately going to answer, well, no, because Christ is God, so it wouldn't be fitting for him to learn through someone else's instruction. And what he's going to say with this is that we have two modes of learning. One is by discovery, and then another is by being taught. And that's where he's going to say, it wasn't fitting for Christ to be taught something as if he didn't know it and then came to know it. Rather, what he did is he gained it through discovery. And what he even says, though, referring back to the Gospel of Luke, where it says that Christ grew in wisdom as he grew in years, he actually lays out how Christ didn't have all of his practical experiential knowledge at the first moment of his conception, but he actually grew it proportionately and appropriately as he aged. Right? Okay, so there's one spot where he talks about should anyone be a teacher of Christ. Another spot he'll say should one man teach another, and there he'll say for us, for the general person, all of us who are not Christ, like yeah, there's a lot of times where we need a teacher because same thing for us. We'll learn some things by discovery, but most of it we'll have to learn through teaching, and in order to, again, understand that, as Thomas does, he's going to take us all the way back to the starting point. He's going to say, what is it that happens in the acquisition of knowledge? Okay. And in that acquisition of knowledge, what he's going to say that happens is that our mind is moved from potency to act in understanding. All right. So potency is we don't yet understand the thing, and then we actually understand it. That's what knowledge is doing, right? It's moving us from a potential to know a thing to the actuality of knowing a thing. And here's where he's going to introduce the dynamic of teaching. He's going to say, okay, so what does a teacher do? He says, well, a teacher is something extrinsic to a person or exterior to a person. All right. But the teacher's not having an effect the way that a house builder has an effect on building the home. The house builder is going to have the concept in their mind, and it's just going to impose it onto the material that they use to build the house. No, rather, he says teaching is going to be more like what a doctor does, which is they have a craft, they have a knowledge, and that knowledge actually draws on what's naturally in the person itself, right? So the doctor is trying to heal a person by working with the way the human body works, right? And that's the same thing a teacher is going to do. Is a teacher is going to have knowledge, but it has to transfer it to the student by working with what the student already has to work with, which are the same things we all have to work with. The light of reason, okay, which is given to us by God. That's the ability of our minds to actualize potential knowledge. All right. And so now we boil all the way down to the core of this. And he says, okay, so in what ways does a teacher help a student to learn? Right? In what ways? How do they actually do that? Okay. And so here there's two ways. They help in the acquisition of knowledge. Okay. And then they demonstrate for them. And in this helping of acquisition, he even says there's two ways that it does that. The first is by making the information more accessible. So we make it easier for them. And what the technical term for that is we give them less universal propositions. So we're trying to teach them a more universal proposition, something that has a stronger essential content to it. But we start by giving them something that's smaller in scope. All right. That will be clearer to them on the surface, but ultimately less clear intellectually. But we want to move them toward what's more clear intellectually. So we start by, we make it accessible. We put it down into bite chunks, bite chunk sizes for them. But then the second thing we do is we furnish them with a lot of examples, because examples are going to be the key to how the mind works in the process of discovery. Right? If someone were to discover a truth about something, it'd be that they experience it and they use their mind's ability to reason through things to now arrive at conclusions. And if they get it right, then that means that they rightly concluded those things from their experiences. They sort of went through the steps of inductive and deductive reasoning properly to get to the conclusion. Well, with students, what we're trying to do is we're trying to give them a lot of examples so these examples can relate to them, so they can see by comparison or by opposition. Sometimes you give an example that's what the thing is not. But through those things, either a comparison and analogy or what it's not, they start to piece together the principles. And then you give them the bite-sized ones, and then you move it out from there. All right. So that's what we're doing. And then the last, the other one we said, so we try and help them to acquire it, and then we demonstrate it. The last thing we do is we actually model it. So one of the most valuable things I would do as a teacher in the classroom is every once in a while, I would just in the heat of the moment come up with a question to pose to the kids. And I would, in that moment, as I would ask them it, I would then do it as well. I would say, okay, hey, we're trying to learn how we define a thing, right? Now, every definition, this is what our metaphysics can teach us, every definition is going to have a genus and a difference. That is, the genus is something that it's common to, and the difference is something that differentiates it, right? So what's a table? It's a piece of furniture that you place things on. Furniture would be the genus. That you place things on is the difference, right? So this is how you make a definition. So in trying to help kids with that, I might ask them, hey, okay, what is basketball? What's what is the game of basketball, right? By saying game, I'm already giving a sort of genus to it. But what I would do is I would then work on it alongside. I would say, oh, hey, all right, as you guys are working, I'm going to work too. And then we're going to field all their questions. Then I'm going to show them how, hey, this isn't something I prepared. Rather, it's something I'm going through the process of doing. And those were probably the most valuable teaching moments, precisely because they did that thing that Thomas Aquinas was talking about, where they demonstrated how you actually carry it out. Not in something I had prepped and been ready to do, but something that in the moment I'm now applying those skills, right? And so this is the thing. This is what we're doing in schools. This is why understanding what knowledge is, how we gain it, matters, because it tells us, all right, what are we trying to do as a school, right? We're trying to teach kids, we're trying to help them acquire knowledge, and then we're trying to demonstrate it, we're trying to model it. And as we'll get to, this is what maps onto virtue, why schools are a fitting place for learning about virtue. Okay, so I know I said a lot there, but let's
so important, that point about demonstration. I've been a literature teacher for about 20 years now, and I've always found that some of the best lessons have been when I have no real lesson plan, just a couple of fundamental concepts that I want the class to understand. And how we get there is more about their questions that I haven't really anticipated, the ones that just come up in the moment, and they might present an interesting problem to me, and we figure it out together. And then those insights seem to take deeper root. So I think that's a really great message. You have to be confident as a teacher to do that. And some people prefer the security of a lesson plan, but I think kids can feel the difference.
Yeah, well, and that's really the craft of the Socratic method. The Socratic method in a class, which I think sometimes gets more hype than it probably should, but it's a really good tool to have in the toolkit, is this question and answer format with kids, right? And it's what questions do you ask? How do you probe them so that they can draw deeper into the material, into the understanding that they're trying to actualize, right? And so a teacher that's really sharp in their craft can handle that Socratic method well. They can enter into the unknown, and through that then model probably more directly than any other lesson they could plan out, or any other curriculum design they could make. Just through doing that, it shows them how the mind moves from the unknown to the known by using certain skills, right? By identifying certain parts of a response and going, okay, let me probe that question more there, right? That part of the response is maybe loaded with a lot of potential obscurity, right? There's maybe something they said there where it's like, okay, I don't actually know if that kid has that with clarity yet, or even just another person. It doesn't even have to be a kid. When they said it in that way, this happens with politicians. You're like, okay, you said that. I don't know that term is very loaded, right? And so that's where a teacher will have that instinct to be able to go and built on actual knowledge to be able to go to those things and go, okay, that's definitely an area that if they can parse it well, can reveal a great depth of learning. But if they can't, which is where most students are at, now I can help them to get depth in that area.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And what you said about the general and the particular, and the level of abstraction that students can handle at different levels of understanding and development, that's so true as well. And Aristotle talked about the work of literature as a kind of concrete universal. So if you're looking at a tragedy, for example, even a tragic hero, you've got this concept in mind, and you might not fully understand it yet when you're first reading some of these works, but the more particular examples of it you encounter, and you recognize some of those concepts, you can start to abstract from that, and then you get it. That's what a tragic protagonist is. That's what a tragic work is. And then you can apply that new conceptual understanding to other works that you encounter. The difference between that and a comedy, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's a perfect example. That is what, is going on with the mind. We're trying to take the concrete, pull out the universal, and then from those universals work back to inform the concrete.
Yeah.
Right.
And the fact that we can do that is a sign of our rationality, because to be able to form abstractions, you need an intellect. Abstractions are immaterial things. This is why only man is the rational animal. To come back to your point about genus and species, Aristotle's definition of man is the rational animal. So this view of education that you just outlined there really succinctly and excitingly for me, because you don't hear this very much. It's the traditional way of looking at things. We don't hear it much nowadays. That really goes to the core of what it means to be a human, right? When we're thinking about this vision of education, it's actually drawing out what is most essential to our humanity. And you mentioned Aquinas there, and he really emphasizes the importance of both the intellect and the will, right? The two things that make us human and really stand or fall together, like our rationality and the fact that we have free will too. So, how can these two things, the intellect and the will, be really applied in modern educational settings, particularly in terms of fostering what's now called critical thinking and also moral character?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a perfect segue. And as always, it's like Aristotle, Aquinas, they give us the tools to then navigate through those more specific questions with that much more clarity. So, most schools, they've become things that focus on the refining of the intellect, right? But they struggle with how you form moral character. And I should say, most schools don't see that as their own self concept. Their own self concept is we're going to help form your children into people of character, right? That's how they're going to pitch it most of the time. Is that the main thing they're trying to do? They're actually going to even downplay probably the intellect side and say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to help them form moral character, right? And so the question they then have to answer, if they're going to operationalize that, if they're going to leverage it, if they're going to make it tangible and real, is, well, what does that look like, right? How do you actually form someone with moral character? How do you help to form the will? Because here we run up against a fundamental barrier which we can't cross over, which is that you can't force or command or move the will of another. We know that in our own families, we know that in our own marriages, we know that in our friendships. You cannot force the will of another, right? So in order to move the will of another, it takes time. And what people will most often talk to is it requires something like trust, right? It requires connection, because guess what? It's not trust or connection that moves the will. It's what makes it possible to potentially inspire a will. That's the only thing you can do. The only thing you can do is try to persuade a will. And we mean that in a good way, not a deceitful way, right? But so this is what circles back, right? Where those ways of learning, acquisition and then demonstration. You're helping kids to acquire the knowledge, right? Make it accessible, give them examples, and then demonstrate it. It's the same thing with the will. There are things you can understand about the will, both what the will is and what it does and what is appropriate to its sort of domain, right? And the virtues primarily are going to be what that sort of constitute, what that answer constitutes. And so you can teach them, and it's important to teach them what the virtues are and what they consist in and what the vices consist in and how vices are opposed to virtues in what ways, right? It's important to actually inform them about what is conceptually understood within those things. But then the other thing that you do as a school is you now have two other parts. You have an institutional side, and then you have that practical side. So the practical side is, how do you model it and demonstrate it so that they can be led toward it, right? And we know that for young boys, it's really important for them to be able to see men doing it. That's one of the benefits. That's why when we're starting up an all-boys school, we're starting up a school to have men in the school educating boys, because it's really important for boys. And we recognize that. And we know that, and we trust that. And we trust the goodness of that, right? So that's the practical side. But then the institutional side is, how do you set up the structure to be able to help in that moral formation? And here, like in the field of economics, we're dealing in terms of disincentives and incentives. What do you reward and what do you discipline, right? And one of the reasons why it's so useful, across the pond there in England, they have a lot more all boys schools. They have a lot more single sex schools. Actually, in America, on the East Coast, they also have a lot more of them. In doing research about opening up an elementary all boys school or hopeful network of schools, I looked into how many do we have nationwide. And so what I had to do is I went to a list on Wikipedia that was the number of all boys schools in the United States. And so I just went through and I clicked on them and I tried to see, well, which ones extend their all boys education all the way down to first grade, at least first grade. And what I arrived at were about 18. The list probably had 150 or so, and there are about 18, okay, that go all the way down to first grade or kindergarten. And then what's interesting is those 18 are across like 3 or 4 states. So they come in bunches, which is also interesting because that says something too, which is like where they're available, there's a market that expands out of that for people wanting more of them, more options. Right? I truly think this, this will be the first one in Minnesota. That's an all boys elementary school, the state where, where I'm from, Minnesota. And I would not be surprised if there are some people that say, hey, now that one's up and running, you know what? I think we want to do an all boys school, but do it differently. Right. Okay. And that's their prerogative. I mean, I'm really trying to hit on all boys education well. And we already even have our sights set on a second location. I'm going to announce the first location in the next week or two, but the second location, we already have our sights set on for a hopeful about 2-year window of time before we can open it. Right. And that has to do with where there's families that we already know of that would want this right now. Okay. And so we're working with that, but it's like, there'll be others I think that will see, oh man, this is such a clear benefit that we want more of them. Right. Okay. So, again, this is something, like I said, across the pond, this is more natural. You guys here in the States, we've really gone away from it. We don't educate boys as boys, but one of the things that you can do institutionally, right, with discipline and incentives, okay, what you disincentivize and what you incentivize is you can discipline a classroom differently if it's all boys, right? And we know this is secular social scientists have found this, that boys and girls respond differently to discipline in different ways. Namely, they respond differently to external discipline. So public discipline. It is the case that girls do not like it. They're not comfortable with it. And it's not even just that they don't like it, because boys, for the most part, don't like it either, but the response is different. The response of girls tends to be to withdraw. The response of boys tends to be to get confrontational. That doesn't mean they have to do it one way or another. That is what tends to happen. And so, as in anything, if you're disciplining publicly and it's unjust, it's not good for someone at all, right? It's not something that's unjust can't bear the good fruits in the wake of it, right? But if it's a just discipline, and there's latitude in that. As a teacher, you have latitude in what you discipline. If there's a just discipline there, public discipline works really well with boys. Okay, so what happens in our co-ed schools? One of two things. Either our co-ed schools stop doing all public discipline, which is a major disservice to boys, or another thing that's even more common, which speaks to the sort of natural appraisal of the situation, is that they publicly discipline boys and don't publicly discipline girls, which then creates a total imbalance in the acted out justice of that place. Because it's just not the case, even if boys will transgress more likely in certain ways. So they know, boys' aggression is more likely to be external and physical, and girls' aggression is more likely to be social. Well, in many ways, social aggression is far more damaging, certainly from a Christian perspective, on the life of the soul, right? It's far more disqualifying than a physical scuffle can be between boys, right? But you have one form that gets publicly disciplined, probably less due to the physical nature and more due to the nature of boys being able to receive and respond to it and girls not. And so, again, this creates a bad dynamic. Either they don't do it at all, and that hurts them, or they do it and they selectively do it toward boys, and that creates an imbalance. So at an all-boys school, no, you say, hey, discipline's a real thing. We need it. We're going to do private discipline as well. We're also going to do public discipline. And this is for the good of the class and for the students, right? And this is the thing that the other schools can't do. So you're really saying here, no, this makes a difference. Okay, and then the second piece, what do you incentivize? What do you reward? Well, boys respond really well to very selective rewards, right? They like to strive after the thing that's notable of their accomplishments. And the other thing that boys are very responsive to is overt failure, meaning there's a real means by which they can fail. Right? This isn't something that's like a privilege of boys. So we're not saying, hey, we want to set up a school where the boys get pampered. No, we're actually saying quite the opposite, that we're actually going to do the opposite. We're going to set up the school so that there are, that there's real opportunities of failing. We say opportunity, it kind of sounds fun, but it's like, no, there's a real possibility of failing, because by having that be real, it creates a tension that boys tend to respond well to from a young age, right? I have friends, they're not Catholic, who have remarked, they still remember from about their youngest years, second, third grade, when the teacher would say, "Hey, see how fast you can get this done." It was incredibly motivating to them. They were like, "I don't know, I just would get so pumped for it. Like I wanted to have my hand up first." And now by middle school, they moved in the other direction. So they get to be a teen. Now they're moving in the other direction. They're trying to not respond at all. They're trying to do the cool thing there or what have you. But that's the thing is we're saying, no, boys are moved toward this. We're going to set up a whole school around this and at different levels of resolution, some within the classroom, some across classrooms within the whole school. We're going to sit here and we're going to say, no, we really are going to emphasize learning. We're going to emphasize demonstration, how well they can prove their knowledge, right? And we're going to put a premium on that. And we're going to show you, I come from having educated in an all boys school, right? It was an all boys school that was junior high to high school, St. Thomas Academy here in the Twin Cities. It's a great school. It fits that market. Families know, hey, there's something of value there. What we're saying when I was there is I was saying, hey, there's a value for these younger years too, right? It's meant to be a complement. It's meant to fit into that, right? To say, hey, we don't just have to start at what we'd call junior high. We can do this from the get-go, right? And so I come and co-founder with me, Colin Faust, also comes from teaching at St. Thomas Academy, at an all-boys school. So we come from this milieu, right? We were formed in it. Our educational craft and minds were formed in it. And so we're saying, hey, we're going to take this craft and now we're going to apply it to an area where the market is not fulfilling it. There's no answer. There's no solution there, right? I expect it to be the case that families that aren't Catholic at all, but their boys are struggling in school because that's widespread. Boys are struggling in schools. They're struggling with focus, with attention, with motivation, right? It's bad. It's bad out here. Their parents know, man, they're getting addicted to video games or these other things, or this isn't good. This isn't helpful, right? So we're saying, hey, we're going to provide an answer that's not just lip service. It's not just going to be, here's what we think about your boys. No, we're going to set up the whole school so that it tailors toward those answers, right? And so again, I know that wanders somewhat from it, but it boils back to you asking, how do we form the intellect? How do we form the will, right? And that real question is, how do we form the will? And that's what all of that, sort of longer, those digressions, that's what that all orders to is. How do we form the will, right? So.
Yeah, there's a lot there that's really important and very countercultural. Your point about the public discipline reminded me of how shame is actually a virtue, right?
Yeah.
People nowadays talk about how bad it is to shame someone, but actually, if what he's done is shameful, then that discipline publicly, if it makes him feel that, then that's a good corrective measure. He should be ashamed of it. He ought to be ashamed of it. And that's also deeply connected to honor too. Shame and honor go together. And boys really need to have that sense of honor instilled in the school environment around them. And that's another reason why I think your emphasis on competitiveness and having high standards is really motivating for boys, because they want the possibility of genuine success and failure. There's a line in Spinoza's Ethics about this that I return to often, and it's that all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. All things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. And boys want to be presented with something which is difficult to achieve. And they also want to know that because it's rare, it comes with the kind of respect if you can actually reach that standard.
Yep.
So boys are naturally elitist in that sense, I think. And you really see it in the respect that maybe the fastest kid might get, even at a very young age, or the one who can throw a ball the furthest. They know that excellence has been demonstrated, and it's rare and it's tough, and it motivates them to be able to actually get to that standard too. And
and I'd add to this that what you're trying to do is cultivate a culture in a school where boys start to see that, oh, what we're doing here is rare in relation to all the other schools.
Exactly.
So it's not something where you have to arbitrarily manufacture a selectivity within your school. You start to present them with things. They start talking to their peers, their friends, and they realize, oh, they actually don't know how sentences work. They actually don't know that there's always ever only an action sentence or a linking sentence. It's all either act or being, action or being, right? You can teach them the philosophy in that way where they can start to see it, and then they can start to apply it and see how it applies to questions and how it applies to compound sentences, how it applies to all these things. And then they start to grasp it, and then they realize, oh yeah, my friend, they don't know how that works. They can't track that all the way through, right? And this is hard to do. I mean, when we put this forward, it's like, this took me, years of banging my head against the wall to actually realize, like, oh, that is what it is. And then you find someone else where they said it exactly like that, where the way they used to diagram sentences was based on that. The Reed-Kellogg method was based on that. And you go, oh yeah, dang. All right. So somewhere along the way, our education system has stopped using these things, has stopped teaching them, has lost them, or wasn't able to see with clarity why they are as profound as they are, right? As teachers, as administrators, if we don't have that grasp of it, we're more likely to throw something out that we shouldn't be throwing out. And we'll keep things we shouldn't be keeping. So I even want to, one other kind of circle back what you mentioned, the shame and stuff. This is a valuable one to, again, double down on, address as well here, that the major error alive in our society right now is that we view good and evil as procedural. We think that the emotion of shame is the problem, or the emotion of this thing, or not going through the democratic process is the problem. That is not Christian morality. Christian morality, all right, is anchored in whether it is in line with God's law or not. And even the deeper answer of the natural law, which I said to you over text the other day, is that evil is improper mode, species, and order. Now, that's more technical than you're going to get with any kid, really at any level of schooling, unless they get onto doctorate programs, graduate school and doctorate programs, right? But it actually goes all the way down to that level, that shame is a problem when ordered toward the wrong things, when bearing on the wrong species, the wrong matter, right? When the circumstances qualify, which is related to the mode, qualify it such that it shouldn't be right, right? It's wrong to feel shame for having stood up for Christ. It's right to feel shame for having defected away from Christ, right? And so if schools and administrators and our general public don't grasp that, they then cower in fear of these general things. They try and avoid all of them, which is another thing that alienates them in their leadership from young boys. Boys don't want to hear that there's no room for making jokes. They want to hear the distinction of where they can make the joke and where they can't, of who. And I don't even mean where is in place, like as in school, but who does it go towards, right? That's where you introduce the qualification of a friend of interest versus a friend of proximity. If you're just, going through school alongside them, that's a friend of proximity. You shouldn't be insulting them. It's going to actually amount to a mortal sin, because when it's a friend of proximity, you don't have the actual bond, which is interest, which is mutual goodwill, such that when you're insulting them, you don't even have the requisite goodwill toward them to see them built up well, right? Whereas when you're friends, when two boys are poking at each other who are friends, are jabbing at each other, making fun of each other, right? What does Thomas Aquinas say? He says, well, no, this is actually conduces to the growth of virtue because it helps to inculcate humility in one another, a sort of taking of oneself less seriously. So, I mean, I've been in schools where I give that distinction to 8th grade boys, and it changes them. Because now kids who are inclined toward being funny, they get focused to it. And it's not, hey, the rule is always not, it's never, you have to get this absolutely right from the get-go. It's, hey, this is going to be the principle that we're gearing toward. If you miss on a little bit early on as you're trying to get better at it, okay, that's where a rightful patience comes in. Now, if we get 2 months in and you haven't acquired any of it, now you're going to get the punishments of discipline, of suspension or expulsion, dismissal, right? And we're going to comfortably move through those if that comes about. But up front, first you've given them something, and now they go, oh, wait. So this is how reason can work. It can actually make differences like that. It can actually distinguish things like that. That's transformative for a boy, especially a boy who's funny, right? Because now you're saying, hey, no, that thing that you have, that gift of humor, the confidence, the courage you have to be humorous, to take those risks. We're saying, no, that's actually beautiful. It's a gift from God. And by the way, one of the essential accidents of being a human is mirthfulness, is humor. No other animal even has it, right? And this is why people who get contrary to nature get unfunny, right? But I digress. It that's just a
Yeah, that's a
side quick
great point.
piece.
Making me laugh because I'm remembering a moment when a kid was, brought to me because he'd said something to a friend and he'd been accused of being a bully by another teacher. And I asked a bit about it and I
Yeah,
defended the kid, right? I said,
yeah,
this isn't what you're calling bullying. This is
yeah,
just two friends and they both mean well towards each other.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm not going to discipline him. And your description there explains straight away why a proper understanding of this is more conducive to a masculine environment because you get
yes,
this in like military units as well. You get it on sports teams too. And you can look into like the evolutionary psychology of it as well. It's a way in which men probe each other's weaknesses to be able to make each other stronger. So if
yeah,
you think about a unit who have to defend the perimeter, and you've got a guy who's terrified of the dark and just starts shivering and can't go out and do his duty. And the other guys are going to rib him for that and mock him for being afraid of the dark.
yeah,
And hopefully he responds by getting over it. And they've done him a favor.
yep. Yep. No, I mean it's exactly right. That's why we can't categorically throw things out like that. We don't want to categorically throw out shame. We don't want to categorically throw out humor. Those things. I mean, these are very human things that are meant to be again ordered well, ordered rightly. And then that's the thing is most kids will get demotivated, especially boys. Boys are much more subject to demotivation than girls. They actually know that even in primate species, uh, uh, male primates motivation is more sort of hyperbolic, all or nothing. And female primate, it's much more steady. And it's the same thing in human boys and girls, right? Men and women, is that boys are much more subject to demotivation, to being disinterested, to checking out. And when we give them those things, when you take away reasons for them to be demotivated. So a reason for a boy to be demotivated is he feels like it's arbitrary, it's pointless, doesn't matter. This is just because of someone else's biases or little their own character traits that incline them toward their insecurities, incline them toward thinking this thing. A boy will check out. They'll be demotivated. They'll think school is dumb. They don't care about which class or they're not going to parse it that much. But even that boy, typically, if they get a teacher they like, they'll be like, "Oh, cool, I like that class," right? And so again, what happens is when you set a school up that has these principles and has them in play. People ask because I've been an administrator of a school. This is what you teach during teacher workshop time, during teacher development time, is you establish these principles for the community, for the teachers, for the ones who are going to be overseeing it on the ground, right? And when you do that, and then the buck stops with the principal, with the headmaster, and so kids are, maybe a teacher, hey, I think, and they send you to the office, and then you navigate it, you unpack it, and are able to give it in line with the things that you've said and then reinforce it while still affirming the teacher and their authority. Like I said, you have a lot of latitude in your authority as a teacher, which is appropriate, right? But now you're reinforcing and kids are being built up. You start to see the motivation change. You start to see their attention, their focus, their energy levels, their enthusiasm. It changes. It's real, right? I've been in school. It's real. And so that's now what we're doing is we're taking it all the way and we're just saying, okay, yeah, no, let's set up a whole school in this all boys environment from the time they're young. And let's get this going. It will transform people's lives. It
And
will.
I would add that just given that homeschooling is becoming more and more popular, I would add that an environment of the sort that you're describing here has greater transformative potential, especially for boys, than a homeschool environment does,
Yeah.
because these things are best learned within the context of a wider community. And it's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to get the same kind of competitive atmosphere among boys that you get in a school run like this
Yeah.
if the boy doesn't come into contact with other boys very often.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
possible to do, but it's very hard.
very hard. And, Proverbs tell us, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And the even more technical answer is that reason, which is our mode of knowing, rational knowledge is our mode of knowing, meaning we have to actually work through premises to conclusions every time. That's why we have to have habits of knowledge. An angel doesn't have to have habits of knowledge. They just grasp the thing they have. We actually have to have habits. And the more we lose it, if we stop talking about a subject for a few years, we're like, oh, shoot, what was that? You got to call it back to mind and work through. Well, we work through those things. It's actually by a process of opposition, going from one to its contrary, back to it, back to it. We slowly start to discern more through this process, this polarizing process of opposition. So that's for boys. First we're acting that out. And then later in life, we do that within our own heads. Our minds become capable of doing it within our own heads. But boys need this, right? So, I mean, yeah, again, I've talked about this before. Homeschooling is a remedial solution. The situation is really bad. It's ideologically so corrupted and warped that we as families don't feel comfortable sending our kids to a school at all, right? That's the place for homeschooling. But it's not an ultimate solution. It's not an enduring solution for this reason. It has these huge knocks to it, or negative sides that they can't provide in a homeschool. Namely, a school can provide community formation, and not just amongst kids, but amongst parents, right? And for boys, especially when they're young, it gives them the context for them, iron sharpening iron, one man sharpening another. It gives them the context for them to do that. This is very, very important for boys. And that's the whole idea, is we're saying, actually, the venture to start up a school is much like the motive to pull kids out and move them to homeschool, right? The motive to venture into starting a school is much like the motive to pull them out and homeschool, because you're saying, hey, we're actually going to try and provide something that others aren't. And now most times when people start up a school, they change maybe the way periphery, or they change what's going to animate it, again, sort of content wise, what resources they're going to turn to, how they're going to do it, and they maybe try and change to sort of cultural things what they're going to do. At this school, certainly in Minnesota, in the Midwest, we'll be the only all boys elementary school in the whole Midwest, which is like a 5, 6, 8 state region, depending on how you parse it out, in the middle of America. We'll be the only all boys one. We're saying, no, we're actually going to be doing something different on a structural level that no one else is doing, not just a day-to-day level. That stuff will all follow from it. But we're saying no, because this is what the actual solutions look like, where now you form a community of people that are realizing the benefit first and then thinking about it second. And some will come to the community having thought about it first. They'll see it, it'll resonate for them, and they'll go, yeah, I want to have it there. That's why when co-founder and I, when we started sort of piloting this and spreading it to other families, immediately they were like, yes, I want to sign up. The question is the school going to be in their area or not, right? At all in their vicinity. And some of them will probably drive a ways. But right away, the apprehension was immediate. They didn't need to hear a ton of other nuts and bolts. All boys, elementary, they have elementary age boys. I want my kid to go there, right? Oh, it's going to be Catholic. It's traditional, right? So they know me and the co-founder, they know us. We're very, classical in our understanding, right? We're traditional. We have that again, the Aristotelian, Thomistic, the metaphysics ground it. So how we see all the different things ground it. And so that's icing on the cake for them. That's for them to trust that when they see the all boys elementary, boom, done. We want our kid there. Yeah. Right. And the hope from this is to say, we're not just trying to fit this to people that are, on fire with their faith. Yeah, we want them. Absolutely. They're going to be able to see this and recognize the beauty, the inspiration of it right away. But we also want to go to those families that are struggling making sense of our modern secular world, right? They're living it out. Their mind is there. They think, yeah, all these principles check out of the secular world. But there's these discordances, these disharmonies, right? They're struggling. Their emotions are all over the place. Their relationships aren't very satisfying. They're not fulfilling, right? Again, because they're ordering things wrongly. They're putting their final end in just their spouse. No, that has to be ordered rightly to God. Otherwise, the thing itself loses it, right? So they don't see it. They want those things. They want the things we want, right? They want happiness. They're failing in their pursuit of getting it. And the Christian doesn't succeed where they fail. The Christian rightly puts it in God. And so defers it off. And then the things in this life start adding up too. So we want the families that say, you know, I guess I'm not there all the way there in the way you're seeing the whole worldview, but I know my boy is struggling in school. I know, again, parents know this without knowing the stat. A boy and a girl that present with the exact same symptoms for attention deficit hyperactive disorder, so ADHD, ADD, all right? Girls and boys who present with the exact same symptoms, a boy is 2 to 3 times more likely to get prescribed medication for it. Right? We're talking the same symptoms. Now, overall, as to who present with symptoms, even there, you now have a 2 to 3 times more likely in boys than girls. So you got to multiply those together to get to the real distribution between boys and girls. But even if they have the exact same symptoms, a boy is 2 to 3 times more likely to get prescribed medication. Families know that. They know that something in how this school day is set up is not working well for my boys, right? And that's why we're going to be thoughtful. We're intentional in all the different layers of what we're doing. And we come from boys' education, from all boys' education. And I come from being an administrator in an elementary school. So this is attuned to real things, right? These are real factors. And so from there, now we can present something that has that immediate apprehension, that immediate recognizability for a family. And they might not even be Catholic. They'll say, dang, but I want my boy there. And we're saying, yeah, we want your boy here too, right? Because we believe that this matters. We believe it transforms families and it transforms lives and it transforms marriages one day. We believe that. Right? And so that conviction shows out, you know. The conviction runs so deep that we will even venture to do things like this for it. So.
And to be able to educate a boy well, you have to know what a boy is and therefore what is good for a boy. And the modern educational world really has forgotten what a human being is, doesn't really have a coherent metaphysics of the human person, and is also especially confused about what a boy is. And I believe that one of the reasons for this is that virtue, which used to be at the heart of education in so many ways, has largely just gone off the radar for most of these institutions. They see themselves as just providing training for particular jobs. And the hope is that if the boy passes enough exams, he might get the qualifications to get a particular job that gives him a particular salary. For many parents and many schools, that's all education is. But if you go back to the ancient Greeks and Aristotle again, thinking about the real deeper purpose of education, liberal education, as distinct from servile, was the kind of education that befits a free man and is conducive to the flourishing of the human person, the human spirit. And if we're thinking about Aquinas's concept of the will and why virtue is so important and how it's connected to virility as well, even etymologically, like to be a strong man, to be good at being a man is to be virtuous. We've got to think about how we can reintegrate the concept of virtue back into modern educational curriculums. Because the goal really is to form strong, good men.
Yeah.
They will learn important lessons from this school system you're describing so they can go out and live lives that glorify God, honor themselves, their families, and societies too.
Help me to track this as we go along because I'm going to lay it out. There's kind of a few steps to this, but help me as I'm going through it, if I forget, okay, what's the next step that I had set up front. I hopefully I'll, retain it all. But first, I think we want to talk about what does the distinction between masculinity and femininity pertain to, because we don't want to overextend that, and we don't want to underextend it or sort of underdefine it either. So that's the first thing we want to do. Then we want to talk about, again, virility, manliness, these sorts of things, how it relates to virtue. Okay. So the first thing to do, which is the real difficulty, saying what a human person is tough. And it's especially tough if the fundamental questions um, about existence itself have not only been contested, but then thrown into murky and uncharted territories, sort of unknown territories. And that's what happened with really the assault on the subject that's called metaphysics, right? Is that there's a major, I mean, it's the most abstract of subjects, but it's the one that most bears on all the other things. And so most of the attacks on it haven't even been direct attacks on it. Rather, most of the attacks have been on the surface that just crumble apart its foundations. And then people never cared to go anywhere. So, okay, I bring in metaphysics because one of the things we have to be able to do is say which part of being a man affects our behaviors and in what ways, and which parts of being a person, a human, male or female, are differentiated from the masculine, feminine, right? Because our problem in our society now is we're polarizing between two extremes, and the general public is on the one extreme, which says there's no difference, right? Which would be the sort of again error of defect. Then the error of excess is going to come in and say, well, masculinity is going to do all these things, and you're going to end up overextending the definition, right? So what does like a Thomas Aquinas say? Like where does the difference in virtue really boil down? Because we've got the cardinal virtues, you've got prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And these are different based on the different sort of abilities we have. Prudence is now going to be of the mind. And a lot of people say justice is sort of like of the heart, of the will. It's how you incline toward others. And then temperance has to do with both fortitude and temperance have to do with the appetites. They kind of say the stomach. One is in the stomach of what you crave. That would be temperance, and then fortitude is the stomach you have to go and try and do difficult things, to attack things. Okay, this is a good way of laying it out, right? Thomas Aquinas locates the masculine feminine distinction in those appetitive virtues, right? Of temperance and fortitude. Okay, so he doesn't track it all the way up. Now, it's going to play out in subtle differences all the way up. But for example, masculine, feminine isn't going to bear on what you do with your voluntary time because we as humans both can grasp voluntary time. Our minds are quite flexible. And so we can do really what we want with our voluntary time, right? Appropriately speaking. We might do some things with some better ability than others. But in terms of what one ought to do, it's not going to bear much on that, right? Now, where he says it does bear is more temperance and fortitude. And in this way, particularly, one is inclined to a strength in one where the other's not, and the other's inclined to a strength where the other's not, right? So he says that women have a disposition toward temperance, right? And they have this disposition. We can bear this out. This isn't actually that complex. We know what women are fighting over whether they should be able to abort their child or not, right? That's an active thing in society. And some portion of them are convinced of it. Why? Because that's gonna bear on effectively in a false and deformed way how they can realize temperance, which is to say, they know that the consequences of intemperance bear out in practical reality for them in a way that they don't for men. So they're saying, can we put this artificial blocker in place in case we are intemperate so that it doesn't lead to any consequences we don't want? Right? Unfortunately, morally and spiritually, it doesn't work that way. That artificial, corrective mechanism you're trying to put in place is actually to the death of one's soul, right? The demise of their eternal soul, right? You then will have to suffer the second death, which you ought to be afraid of that, as the Lord tells us in Revelation, be afraid of the second death, not the first one. Okay, but so women, because of the consequences, the tangible consequences of intemperance, they're inclined toward temperance. Aren't as inclined toward it. That doesn't mean a man doesn't have to achieve temperance, right? Or that intemperance isn't a problem for men too. It is, but their disposition inclines them to it. So you're going to see women excel in it more often than not, so long as you don't put these artificial barriers in place. And even then, you'll still see it more because the nature is that deeply ingrained, and it still stays real, right? For men, they're going to be inclined toward fortitude in this way, right? What does fortitude do? It attacks, right? And what men have in stature is more fitted to attacking than women. We can think of that physically, but it's going to bear out on other things too, right? So men are to be inclined more toward fortitude. That's what Thomas is going to tell us. Okay, so that's what we want to parse out. We want to be able to say, where is it going to have a bearing and in what ways? It's going to be dispositional. It's not going to exclude excellence in either of them for one another, but you're going to see a real tendency that's different. It's going to be real. It's not fake. It's not merely a social construct or something, right? And this now will in turn affect other things, because guess what? Prudence, we talked about it on the virtue show that you and I did. Prudence does not supply the end, right? Prudence deliberates about means to an end. Well, what supplies the end is temperance and fortitude, the appetitive virtues, and even those not equally. Temperance is sort of the first layer which will present it, and then fortitude is the one that will continue to go after it even if it's hard, right? So in families, in society, we need this temperance, rightly ordered, when done well, will help us to identify the ends. And fortitude, when well developed, will help us see through, right? Stay to those ends. That's where we need that, right? That's where we need that complementarity. And so, again, that was the first part. And that's why I asked you to help me track it. Oh, the second part was virility, manliness, right? What does this relate to? Well, I think one of the coolest ways to point this out is that Thomas Aquinas, in his commentaries on both the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Matthew, talks about Saint Andrew. And he talks about, in Greek, the root for Andrew is the same as the root for like virility or manliness. So he says that Andrew actually means manly. It would be like if his name was Manster, all right? Saint Manster. Same root as manly, all right? So this is Saint Andrew. And so Thomas lays out, well, why is that? Why is Saint Andrew the first one called? Why is he the first? They actually hold him to be the first Christian. Tradition holds Saint Andrew to be the first Christian. He's the one who comes right away. Well, he says this is actually going to tell us something, and it's really great. He says that manliness has something to do with promptness. You do it right away. Manliness also has something to do with zeal, because what's the first thing Saint Andrew does is he goes to get Peter to bring him along. Zeal is something that when you have it, you want others to have it too. When you have something good, especially something spiritual, you want others to have it. Right? And then the last one he says is a selflessness, because what he shares is not something that's for his own good, but for their good. All right? So there's three really kind of helpful ways that we can think about manliness, virility, right? Promptness, okay? Zeal, and selflessness, right? Oh, well, that's beautiful. All right? And by the way, we want to encourage all people to strive for that, but that's what we're going to help our boys to strive for. Promptness in trying to do the good, right? Zeal in doing it and sharing it and spreading it and persevering in it. And then selflessness, rightly ordering it toward other things. Even a father in a family, right? Thomas says the difference between a father and a master, a father to their family and a master to their servants, is that a master has their servants do things for the master's good. The father has them do them for their good and for the common good of the family, right? And so that's what a father, they have to have that selflessness so they can rightly order it, right? Rightly order the things that they're doing. They have to be able to put their child's good first when dealing with them. And that's not what the child says they want. It's actually what's good for him. They have to be able to discern that, right? A father also instructs a parent. And by the way, that's actually parents more broadly. Parents instruct their kids. Well, what do you have to instruct them in? God's law, in encouraging them toward good, right? Helping to restrain them from evil. Okay? So now these things start to fit together, and you can see how a school that understands and internalizes these things is going to do a lot of things differently. And we should say they're going to do basically everything they do very intentionally, right? And so where things coalesce with other schools, it's maybe by coincidence on the part of the other schools. But where it's different, it springs from a deep sort of grasp of these principles, a deep yearning to live them out. It's that same thing, the promptness, the zeal, and the selflessness, right? We're going to do things with zeal here, right? I didn't wait until I was 30 years into my career as an administrator to start up a school, or 20 years. I said, no, let's do it right now. I didn't even realize it, but it's like, that's the promptness, right? And the zeal is because, no, there's something really good to share here, which is boys' education for boys where they're struggling. Let's start to get the solution put in place, right? And then selflessness is, how do we order it toward the good of the society, toward the good of the individuals, toward the good of, again, of God, of faith, of worship. So,
And you've got the aptitude for it as well.
Yeah. That's kind of the fourth one where he'll throw in there. It's something like, sometimes translations have it as like privilege, or others sort of more like aptitude. That is that sort of that manly, what they would call constitutes that manliness. Not as if aptitude doesn't apply to femininity, but we're just saying, hey, but we're not saying any of them you have to cross it, but we're saying, no, this is what it means to be a man. You do these things.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a great answer. I often get asked whether there are, strictly speaking, specifically masculine virtues, but the cardinal virtues are the same list for men and for women, just like there's the same 7 deadly sins. But what you've explained there is that men and women might inflect or refract them slightly differently. So there's a different emphasis,
and that's
right?
where we said we don't. That's where we said we don't want to overextend the
No.
distinction masculine, feminine. Like the distinction is in that inclination toward fortitude, inclination toward temperance. Like that is ultimately what it boils down to. It will reverberate into the other ones, into prudence, into justice, into the acquisition of the intellectual virtues, things like that. It will, but it's reverberating, and it's reverberating on the periphery. The core of those are going to be identical, right? And again, both of these, you see them, the complementarity means not that women don't have to be courageous and that men don't have to be temperate, but rather that one is going to sort of hold up the excellence that the other one strives for. You see the actual complementarity of the modeling of it. You know, again, the working together in it. And it's not even that. Thomas will say it's not an arithmetic equality. It's a geometric equality of proportion. There is real leadership. There are things that come along, right? And because they would say leadership is going to be fitted to persevering, to that courage, right? Okay, that's fine. But again, we want to parse it out with specificity so that we don't overextend, because that's to our own demise. And we don't want to under parse it and just neutralize it and equalize it, because then, of course, we're also not resonant with reality. And you'll reap all the demotivating consequences downstream from that, and drug use and video game addictions and listlessness and disinterest and, you know, withdrawal from the economy and from society and all these, from the faith. You're going to get all of that downstream of the defect of trying to neutralize it. You don't want that. So,
of course. And I see that as one of the main problems in education that your new project is going to address, because like the church fathers said, error grows best in the shade of truth, right? The heresies are very close to the truth. And boys who are being told, as they are in many schools, that masculinity is toxic, they will run to guys like Andrew Tate, for example, who are those trees that are growing in the shade of truth. And they're close to it, in many ways closer to it than the people who are trying to say that masculinity is toxic outright. But they get enough wrong that they can do a lot of damage.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where many young men are going today, because they're not being taught the vision of virtue and being a man that you've outlined.
Yeah, and think about it. This even maps onto what we said about reason polarizing between extremes. Because guess what? The media might want to portray it as men are being captured, you know, by an Andrew Tate worldview. The likely reality for a significant majority of them are probably that they're polarizing in and out. They're probably going in and then being like, and then pulling back out. And then a little later, they're like, but man, this is it's just so unsatisfying the way the rest of the world. And then they go back to it and they take in more of the content, and then they pull back out. And then right? So that's probably more likely what's actually happening with 80 or 90% of the population and the audience. And what he has is, because it's staggered throughout time of who comes there, he has a steady stream of a lot of attention and a lot of popularity, right? But so what you're trying to help kids get to is that realization of what that mean looks like. What you're trying to do is model not the extreme of the contrary that actually doesn't offer anything else but the sort of mode of discovery where you have to stumble through trying to learn it, but the leaders who have actually internalized what the actual virtue looks like, what that actually comes to, what it embodies, like how they understand it, how they can navigate and parse out those points. And that's the difference. That's what we're trying to do. Again, like you said, heresy always has a nugget of truth. Anytime you have disproportionate responses from the secular media, from the political right or the left, it's almost always because their reason hasn't parsed something out rightly, like it could. And then in the absence of parsing it out, it's still trying to go and give directives or act, due to other probably just personal vices, craving to be able to command or do things like that, which all sort of feel good to us. So again, you have this sort of situation where it's like, no, the job that we face today, which is a tall task, is trying to figure out, okay, how do we parse? How do we parse through all the different levels, all the different domains, and then communicate that? That's that difference between homeschool and school institution, where we say now we institutionalize it, we give it roots, and we help it to actually spread. So that, again, like I said, this is meant to be, we have a model in place. We're going to announce the first school that we're opening here in the next couple of weeks, but the same model we went through of getting that, which is relatively affordable if you have the mapping out of it up here. That doesn't mean it's not nothing, but it's relatively affordable. It's doable. That's how we can then track and expand it, scale it to other locations in the state, in other states, in other countries. Because what we're saying is, no, it's important for us to be able to have these things vetted and thought out well in all the different angles, right? Legally, financially, okay? At the top of that, like we're talking about, vision-wise, right? Actual sort of philosophy of education-wise. We have to have these things mapped out so that they can populate, so we can repopulate them in different places, so we can spread it and make it real and tangible and graspable for more people, concrete on the ground, right? And then the last thing you have to have anytime you enter a venture with this is my co-founder and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago. For about an hour, we were talking about how we have to have the predetermined humility already baked in to realize that this is not an eternal institution we're setting up, right? It's not going to be that. Now, good institutions, and we won't get to decide whether we have one of those or not, they can last 100 or 200 years. And depending on the movement of society, maybe they can go longer. If the sort of movement of society sort of stabilizes out, then they can maybe go longer, right? In a really rapidly changing one, it might be a 50-year lifespan if it's really good, 50, 70, 100 years, It's like, but we don't get to decide when it ends, but we have to know up front that it will end. It's not meant to be forever. That even this will be another node where, okay, it hits something really right that does something really meaningful. If it can. That's our hope, that it can. It can hit something really right. It can do something meaningful. And then from there, it can build out. Other people can find a new variation as it moves society and changes things, and then boom, right? And then you pass it off, and you go, okay, that's okay. I'm not establishing an eternal institution. I'm not establishing something that's good for for some eternal reputation or vainglory. It's all Christ. It just all boils down to Christ. Everything that is laid on the foundation that is not Christ will be lost. If it's wood, hay, stubble, it'll be burned off and returned to it, right? If it's good, if it's gold, if it's silver, if those things that build on that foundation, then it will remain, but because of that foundation, right? So I think it's even about the only way you can rightly, mentally even navigate a sort of aspiration like this, that's broader, that's trying to address something, is to have the disposition, like I mentioned here, of humility, to know that it needs to die. At some point, it will have to die, because it will, right? And so, okay, that gives us a detachment where we can more courageously venture into really trying to do this, right? So,
And it's also a work of recovery in many ways, because you're staying true to the principles that have been proven in the past in many other excellent institutions. The core ideas of your approach aren't new, they're time tested. We know that they work. So it's about putting people back in touch with some of that wisdom that the modern world has become disconnected from.
Yeah.
T.S. Eliot, one of the best 20th century poets, has a great line where he asks, "Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" And you often hear that kids don't need teachers anymore because they have Google, they have Chat GPT. Schools are unnecessary because kids have got the world of knowledge at their fingertips. But that hasn't proven to be the case. You now have colleges teaching remedial writing courses.
Yeah.
If anything, it seems that education has got worse in many ways. The more information has become readily available. So, a return to principles and knowledge and discipline and reasoning in the way you're outlining here, I think is exactly what's needed.
Yeah.
Where can people go to find out more about it, AJ?
Yeah. Well, first I'll answer that. www.crownofthornsacademy.com. We got the website up and running. crownofthornsacademy.com. But I want to quick, kind of close out. Plato in one of his dialogues has one of his characters say that writing would be the death of the intellect or of the intellectual life. Because now that people would be writing it out, they wouldn't have to generate it in real time from the ground up. What actually answers that conundrum that the modern world is struggling with, where, yeah, again, does a kid really need it? It's a failure to understand how knowledge works in the human mind. And we've laid that out in this discussion. The rational intellect moves through things from premises to conclusions. If you don't rep it, you lose it. Now, if you acquire the ability, you can retake it up later on when you return to it. So you'll still lose it, but once you see it again, you refresh. Oh yeah, right. It's sort of it's like it falls back into a groove that's maybe weaker, but it's still there. Okay, right. This is the whole key. Yeah, you can go Google something to get an answer, but it doesn't mean you actually even know what the right question to ask is. Google can answer your question, but you might not ask the right question. And if you get down to the deep questions, right? What does it mean to know a thing? Google and AI really don't answer it well. Because then they have to go, well, here's all these different theories. And you're like, well, that doesn't actually give me clarity. Right? So knowing what questions to ask is actually the way harder skill, which it can't do for you. And then what it gives you is answers in the sense that you don't need to learn any process. And by the way, you still don't habituate. You can't build it from the ground up from there. If you can't build it up from the ground up, you don't grasp it. Right? So again, the actual answer to that conundrum that they've laid out is a different understanding, a right understanding of the intellect, like that we can all experience. This wasn't because Aristotle said it or because Thomas said it. We actually experience that. If we don't rep talking about a thing, thinking about a thing, we lose it. We lose the precision in it. We all experience that. The view of the computer's knowledge is once it gets it, it has it, and that's that. So if a kid Googles something, gets the answer, then it has it, that's that. But that's obviously not true because, like we said, we already demonstrated it with the other example, right? So that's the thing. A school, administrators, headmasters, founders, they have to have that distinction clarified and then the principles really internalized. And then they have to be habitually working on it so that they're building it out constantly. They're constantly thinking in that. That's another one. Starting up these schools, a lot of times when schools get started up, it's parents that are upset with the education their kids are facing, right? Rightfully so. And so then they have to go and try and hire someone who's going to establish their curriculum, hire an administrator to oversee the running of the school, right? This one, this school project is springing from educators in education, thinking about it in very novel and integrated ways to the principles, but not just the principles that your modern, education degrees thrown at you, but the principles that, like you said, are timeless. We're trying to reconnect to that so that we can mine out that wisdom and then build and add to it. Because our technical knowledge, and really what we mean to say is knowledge is kind of broken down into, I don't even know, essences are broken down into substances and accidents. And the reality is that due to technology, we just have more, we have view of more substances. That's the key. So now we need to take those principles and integrate them to a vaster array of potential knowledge, right? There's a vaster array of potential knowledge. And that's kind of that work of renewal, is we're saying, okay, we're taking that because these principles are so good. They're demonstrable how good they are. Now we're going to now integrate them in this context.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you've done a great job, AJ, at outlining why this is so timely, precisely because it's ultimately rooted in what is timeless. And
Yeah.
anyone who has understood that in terms of the metaphysics of the human person here, and also the broader vision of this educational project as ultimately resting on that foundation stone of Christ, to whom all truth ultimately belongs, will see
Yeah.
that this is really a manifestation of the traditional Catholic doctrine of the social kingship of Christ, but applied to education. The Crown of Thorns Academy shows what it means really to put Christ at the heart and also at the intellectual center of education. Have I understood you correctly there?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's almost, it's a beautiful compliment, you know, to say that you're seeing that in what I'm saying and what we're, you know, what I'm presenting. So yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
It's been a pleasure to hear you outline your plans for this, and I'm really looking excited. I'm excited to seeing how it all unfolds. And
Yeah.
for people who want to learn more about it, go check out the website. And AJ's Substack as well is a great place to read some of his writings on virtue and on education. So I'd highly recommend that.
Yeah, thanks. And we're getting everything squared away to be able to file it in America with the IRS to make it a nonprofit, so that we can start you know, allowing people to be able to donate and get tax rebates for having done that. But we're gonna, the people who see it who aren't in the state, you know, in the state of Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, who are like, hey, I want to support this project, we're gonna create the avenues for people to be able to do that. For right now, it's not that. Just pique your interest. Just get interested. If this is interesting to you, just look more into it, right? Read more of what we've got. Just get excited about it, right? Spread the word. That's honestly more valuable up front. The dollars can only move things to the degree that we have a vision for what we're trying to do. Or I should say, the dollars only move things well if we have a vision for what we're trying to do, right? And the real idea too is, as places, as people in other places are going, hey, we really like this, that's the occasion for us to say, great, let's look and figure out what we have to do to start one up there.
Yeah.
Whether we're in England, and I don't know English, you know, laws and what's going on in Britain there, so that might be, you know, a barrier we can't jump. But if it's other states in the United States, certainly, and there's a lot of countries worldwide where we can do this, where we can move and implement things. What I mean to say is, I don't know what their barriers are to starting up a school in England, but a lot of places where they have either limited or the same barriers as America, we're poised to be able to do that and do that well.
Yeah.
Right. So
That's great to hear. And please like, comment, share, subscribe so we can get more eyeballs and ears on what AJ has had to say today. Because, to my mind, at least, this is the future of education if it's going to be restored. There's no other way to get it
yeah.
done.
Yeah, I think so too. It's like that's why I'm starting it up. And there are other educational projects that I think are doing well. They don't all necessarily fit the same model. A lot of them, again, the real clear distinction is they're co-ed. They're not actually harnessing that dynamic, but it's one where it's like, okay, now that we have that dynamic in place, yeah, no, I think that this is a real solution. That's why we're trying to propose it. That's why
Yeah.
we're trying to scrap and claw and do the things we need to do to make it work now. I always say, to start up a venture, you have to go into missionary mode because you don't know what your income will look like for a couple years. So as a family, you have to enter into that, right? My wife, my family, we've entered into that. We're ready if we run out. of our personal savings. Okay, now our personal savings. Now we have to move into that missionary mode. We have to scrap. We have to, scrap for the things that we need. We have to scratch and claw. We have to turn things away because we're saying, hey, this is what it takes to get the ball rolling. And so that's the mindset we've entered into because we're saying, hey, no, I think that this is real. And that's also what makes it exciting. Makes
Definitely.
people want to be a part of it. So
Yeah. And it comes back to that point about demonstration that you opened up with. To the extent that this is about fortitude and all the other virtues that you've explained here, you're going to have to embody those yourself,
yeah,
leading from the
yeah,
front to
right,
make it happen. And that sends a
right,
very powerful message to all the students in this community that you're really trying to get going.
right. Is a great point. Like I said, yeah, our teachers will have to demonstrate in a classroom. This institution, the founding of this institution, will be demonstrating it on that macro scale for
Yeah.
them as well. They'll be able to see it. They'll be able to relate to it. They'll be able to recognize it. Parents will be able to recognize it. And that's why, again, even lastly, it's like we chose the name Crown of Thorns Academy because it's one of the mysteries of the rosary or parts of Christ's life that just for one reason or another, it's been depicted in some great works of painting, some great painting throughout, human history, but it's not one that we don't have churches named after it. We have churches of the Assumption, churches of Annunciation, churches of, the Resurrection, churches of any number of things. Schools, universities of the Holy Cross, churches of the Holy Cross. We have these different things, but one that we haven't, that we didn't find anywhere were the crown of thorns. And we said, as you and I have talked about, the crown of thorns symbolize Christ's willingness to take on humiliation. And in this day and age, that's the one that is the hardest persecution to take on. It is really hard. You and I know it from personal experience. It's difficult. And so we're saying, and this name we came up with, a year and a half ago when we first started mapping this out and diagramming this, because it was like that when we said it, when we said it, when we stumbled on it, it was like that's the name. Not because it's the perfect name. It's not about its ring being perfect, but it's good. But it encapsulates exactly what we have to lean into. It encapsulates the heart in it itself, and that's what you're going for in a brand, is something that resonates with the mission of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what we're doing.
It's really beautiful as well because it's got such a powerful message to the pridefulness that has driven
Yeah.
so many educational institutions astray. Because I'm sure most people watching this will know that that crown of thorns was 2-inch big thorns hammered into the skull of our Lord. This wasn't just resting on the top. And some saints have talked about the crown of thorns in terms of Christ having to take on the sins of the intellect, right? Our
Yeah.
pridefulness in thinking that we know best. So, to me, something about that name really speaks to the fact that at the heart of your vision for education is a return to humility and virtue and first principles and
Yeah.
recognizing that things have gone astray and that we need to go back to what's worked in the past and have that humility to acknowledge that it's not going to be eternal. And without Christ at the heart of it, it's always going to amount to something that is going to be fragile and mistaken in many ways. To the
Yeah.
extent that it's going to be solid and dependable and true and good and beautiful, it's because Christ is at the center of it.
Man. Amen. Amen. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, look, AJ, I'm really happy to hear that this project is becoming a reality. It's a great point for everyone to understand that these things have to be incarnated. These communities have to be made flesh and blood by men like you who are willing to take these risks. Otherwise, they just stay ideas. And of course, the price of becoming flesh and blood, the price of incarnation can often be all kinds of struggles and suffering. And I'm sure there will be some of that on this journey, but it's definitely worth it. So respect to you for doing it, and I hope people really support it.
Thanks, brother. God bless.
And you, great to speak to you as always. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see how this unfolds.
Same. Same.
Take care.
See you, Will.